You know the voice, you know the hair, and you know the leopard print, but there's a lot you might not know about The Nanny. For 6 seasons, Fran Fine became one of the most globally recognizable sitcom characters of the 90s. Many refer to her as the Lucy of her generation. And man, did Fran Drescher have to fight for it. From cornering a network president on a transatlantic flight to refusing to bend to big money backers and fighting through her demons, she left an imprint on TV comedy much larger than people realize. This is the rise, the drama, and the surprisingly huge legacy of The Nanny. But first, like this video if you enjoyed watching The Nanny named Fran back in the 90s, and subscribe for more retro TV deep dives. Okay, let's go back to 1991 and the creators of the show, the husband and wife team of Fran Drescher and Peter Mark Jacobson. Jacobson was an actor who had parts on big shows like Wonder Woman, Murphy Brown, and Matlock, but had pivoted to writing. Fran Drescher had been acting for a while, making her screen debut at 19 in Saturday Night Fever, then following that with American Hot Wax, Wes Craven's Stranger in Our House, and her cult favorite turn as publicist Bobby Fleckman in This Is Spinal Tap. She was a reliable character actress, but never a leading lady, and she knew the reason: her thick Queen's accent. She was told repeatedly to take elocution lessons. She actually tried. She went to a coach who taught her what they called low, slow flow, but it was too slow and she felt it made her sound too generic. So that was the end of that. But then she caught a break. She was cast in a CBS sitcom called Princesses opposite British model and 60s icon Twiggy. Now, the show was canceled almost immediately, but it gave her 2 things that would change her life. The first was a working relationship with costume designer Brenda Cooper, who understood exactly how to dress her for maximum visual impact. And the second was a friendship with Twiggy that led to a trip to London later that year. And here's where the story gets crazy. On the flight to London, Drescher was sitting alone when she spotted the president of CBS, Jeff Sagansky, board the plane. This was her shot, and she wasn't about to let it slip away. She ran into the bathroom, put makeup on, then walked up to him. He recognized her and politely told her he was sorry her last pilot hadn't been picked up and that there'd be more chances down the road. But she didn't want vague reassurance. She wanted a meeting. 9.5 hours later, he agreed. When they got back to LA, she would call his office and pitch his head of comedy development. But here's the thing. She didn't actually have an idea. She had just locked in a development meeting with the president of CBS completely on the fly with absolutely nothing to pitch. But that was about to change. While visiting Twiggy in London, Twiggy and her husband had to work, so Drescher ended up spending the afternoon with their 12-year-old daughter Carly. She dragged Carly all over London with her as a touring companion. And at some point, Carly told her, "Hey Fran, my new shoes are hurting me." Now, a normal adult would offer to take the kid home, but Drescher didn't want to cut her afternoon short. So she gave the kid her best Queen-style advice. She said, "Oh honey, just step on the backs of them." Carly asked, "But won't that break them?" And Fran said, "Yeah, break them in." In her own words, "I wasn't telling her what was good for her, I was telling her what was good for me." And that was the aha moment. The idea was born. A nanny figure giving kids self-serving advice, not Mary Poppins, the opposite of Mary Poppins. She called her husband immediately and shared the pitch. A spin on The Sound of Music, only instead of Julie Andrews, I come through the door. Jacobson agreed that was the idea they'd pitched to CBS. They walked into that meeting in LA with little more than the fleshed out outline they'd put together, and CBS greenlit it right there in the room. And from there, everything was looking up. In fact, they got a massive sponsor, Procter & Gamble, who was willing to buy the show outright. But they had a demand that threatened to fundamentally change the show. They didn't want Fran Fine to be Jewish. They wanted her to be Italian-American. Here's the reason. They believed an overly Jewish protagonist would alienate Middle America. Despite truckloads of money on the table, Fran stood her ground. She insisted the character had to be authentically Jewish, based on her own family in Flushing. She even named the characters after her real relatives, her mother Sylvia, her father Morty, and her grandmother Yetta. Ultimately, CBS backed her vision. They ditched the big money from Procter & Gamble, and as a way to soften things, they leaned into the nanny's employer being British to make the culture clash more about nationality instead of Jewish versus Gentile, which would have been more polarizing. Now that the concept was locked in, it was time to cast the show's stars. For the role of Maxwell Sheffield, the wealthy British Broadway producer and widower, CBS landed on Charles Shaughnessy, and he didn't even have to audition. He was playing Shane Donovan on Days of Our Lives at the time and looking to get out. CBS wanted him for the part, so he took it. Easy peasy. For Niles, the dry, sarcastic family butler, they cast Daniel Davis. Funny enough, Davis is from Arkansas, yet his British accent was so flawless that UK viewers wrote in telling Charles Shaughnessy, who is British, that he should take accent lessons from Davis. For C.C. Babcock, Maxwell's tactless business partner and primary antagonist, they cast Lauren Lane. But after the pilot was filmed, CBS executives wanted her written out. Drescher fought to keep her. To preserve her character, the writers invented the Niles-C.C. rivalry, the verbal sparring that became one of the show's most reliable comedic engines. Seems like it was always meant to be that way, but it was actually a workaround to save her job. For the Sheffield children, Nicole Thom, fresh off Beethoven, was cast as Maggie. Benjamin Salisbury, who'd played Martin Short's son in Captain Ron, was cast as Brighton. Madeline Zima, who'd played the youngest daughter in The Hand That Rocks the Cradle at age 6, was cast as Grace. Rounding out the Fine family was veteran comedy writer and Oscar-nominated screenwriter Renee Taylor as Sylvia, and Morgan Gilbert, best known as Millie Helper from The Dick Van Dyke Show, as Yetta, and Rachel Chagall as Fran's best friend Val Torriello. The Nanny premiered on Wednesday, November 3rd, 1993 at 8 p.m. before eventually moving to 8:30. In the pilot, Fran gets fired from a bridal shop by her boyfriend, who also dumps her. She ends up going door to door selling cosmetics and winds up at the Sheffields. The butler, Niles, thinks she's there to interview to be the nanny, and she lands the job. Now, while things were looking up for Fran the character, the show was in for a rough first season. Ratings were sluggish out of the gate. Many critics found Drescher's voice grating and the concept cliche, and on-set drama threatened to derail the show, even though, as you'll see, it ended up changing Hollywood's sitcom production forever. Now, to understand what happened, we need to go back to January 1985. Drescher and Jacobson were victims of a violent home invasion at their LA apartment. It took Drescher years to recover from that. Anyway, I bring up this horrible story because during production of The Nanny, that trauma resurfaced when a stalker began repeatedly trying to sneak onto the soundstage during live tapings. Now, The Nanny was a multi-camera sitcom shot in front of a live studio audience. That energy was part of the show's DNA. Switching to a closed set with a canned laugh track wasn't an option mid-season, so the production came up with a different solution. They stopped admitting the general public to tapings entirely. Instead, they began casting the audience exclusively from pre-screened background extras. And the casting directors started specifically selecting people who had a naturally loud, robust laugh. So what started as a security measure to protect Drescher had an unintended consequence. It made the show pop. And other sitcoms took notice. The practice of using vetted professional audience members became standard industry practice. But still, The Nanny struggled. It finished season 1 ranked 65th in the Nielsen ratings. And it was inches from cancellation, saved at the last minute by the same CBS president from The Flight to London, Jeff Sagansky, who championed the show and personally urged affiliates to stick by The Nanny for one more season. And it's a good thing they listened because in season 2, everything clicked. First, CBS moved the show to Mondays at 8, where it was the lead-in for a highly successful comedy lineup which included Murphy Brown. As a result, The Nanny got a surge of new viewers, and they loved what they saw. The Niles-CC dynamic was firing on all cylinders, the Fran-Maxwell romantic tension was building, the Fine family was getting bigger storylines, and by the end of the second season, the show had jumped from 65th to 25th in the ratings. And the good times continued in season 3, with The Nanny rising to 16th in the ratings. The guest star list became a who's who: Elizabeth Taylor, Elton John, Ray Charles, Coolio, Whoopi Goldberg, Jason Alexander, Rosie O'Donnell, and Joan Collins as Maxwell's stepmother. In 1995, costume designer Brenda Cooper won the Emmy for Outstanding Individual Achievement in Costume Design for a Series. Cooper was famously dressing the cast in up to 40 complete outfits a week. building an aesthetic that defined 90s sitcom glamour. And ultimately, fans got the moment they've been waiting for. Maxwell told Fran he loved her. But then, in an attempt to keep the will they, won't they tension going, the writers made a huge miscalculation. At the start of season 4, Maxwell took back his I love you. And while sure, it brought back the will they, won't they tension, it also infuriated fans. You gotta remember, viewers loved Fran, but Max wasn't that great of a guy. He'd belittle Fran's background, sabotage her dates, and play with her feelings. This was forgivable and even helpful to the plot as long as it was building toward that I love you moment where his antics were worth it. But when he took that back, fans weren't having it. And to make things worse, CBS pulled The Nanny out of its Monday night comedy block and moved it to Wednesdays, pairing it with newer, demographically mismatched series like Pearl and Temporarily Yours, which didn't last long. As a result, the audience dropped off. The show cratered from 16th to 46th in the ratings, and things just got worse in season 5. The show continued to struggle in its new time slot. They had to adjust the plot lines to accommodate Lauren Lane's pregnancy, which hilariously included Cece carrying enormous handbags, standing behind giant potted plants, holding poster boards in front of her stomach, and going to an asylum to cover for when she was giving birth. And as the ratings crumbled, CBS got desperate. The execs came to Drescher and Jacobson with an ultimatum midway through season 5. Marry Fran and Maxwell or there is no season 6. Now they knew this would completely change the show's dynamics and there would be no turning back. It was likely the kiss of death, kind of like when Mork and Mindy got married. But they had a crew and a cast to take care of, and the longer the show ran, the better it would do in syndication. So they caved to keep the show going. The wedding episode, the season 5 finale, aired on May 13, 1998. It pulled in 16.73 million viewers, which was a massive spike. But even with that bump, the show had dropped from 46th to 50th in the ratings. And from there, the show was headed straight to Cancel Town. The dynamic had completely changed. Fran was no longer the struggling working-class nanny. She was a married millionaire's wife, and the writers didn't know what to do with her anymore, so they leaned into melodrama. Sylvia had an affair that threatened her marriage to Morty. Fran had serious pregnancy complications. The writers also hastily leaned into the Niles-Cece romance. Daniel Davis later called the decision to pair them so flippin' weird, and a mistake that happens on every television show and rom-com that ever existed. Now, this is a lot like what happened with Roseanne. Roseanne was a struggling working-class mom, then she won the lottery, and the whole final season was celebrity cameos and plot lines that drifted far from what audiences identified with. The underdog appeal was gone. Roseanne was canceled the season it went down that road, and the same was about to happen to The Nanny. The Nanny dropped to 84th in the ratings, and by the back half of the season, episodes were drawing under 7 million viewers. The series finale aired on May 12, 1999, a two-part episode in which Fran gives birth to twins, Niles and Cece get married in the same delivery room, and the family moves to California. Drescher has said publicly that she regretted the ending. She would have preferred the show stay on the nanny premise indefinitely and keep the tension unresolved. But even with that creative misstep, the show left a surprisingly huge impact on television. We're talking worldwide. The Nanny aired in over 90 countries and was dubbed into more than 30 languages. And in the early 2000s, Sony Pictures Television used the show to break into international markets that didn't have native sitcom traditions. The biggest breakthrough was in, get this, Russia. In 2004, the Russian channel STS launched My Fair Nanny, a direct adaptation. Fran became Vika, a working-class Ukrainian from a non-prestige Moscow district, and instead of Maxwell, they had Maxim. The show ran for 173 episodes. It became one of the first successful sitcoms in Russian television history, and its success legitimized the sitcom genre across the entire post-Soviet media landscape. But that wasn't the only remake. Get this, The Nanny was also remade in Argentina, Chile, Greece, Mexico, Poland, Portugal, Turkey, and Indonesia. So yeah, the premise that Fran Drescher came up with while in London ended up fittingly an international success. Now, the cast went in very different directions after the show. Charles Shaughnessy won a Daytime Emmy in 2002 for voicing Dennis the Goldfish on the Disney show Stanley. Then he went on to recurring roles on Mad Men, The Magicians, and General Hospital. Daniel Davis was Tony nominated in 2000 for the Broadway play Wrong Mountain. He appeared in Christopher Nolan's The Prestige in 2006, and in 2023, he reprised his role as Professor Moriarty, a character he'd played twice on Star Trek The Next Generation for the third and final season of Star Trek Picard. Madeline Zena built a successful career on Showtime's Californication, NBC's Heroes, and the 2017 revival of Twin Peaks. Nicole Tom voiced Supergirl across multiple DC animated series and films, including Superman, the animated series, and Justice League Unlimited. While this is all pretty standard stuff, other cast members had some interesting detours. Lauren Lane left Hollywood for academia. She joined the faculty of the Department of Theater and Dance at Texas State University in 2004 and has been teaching there ever since. And Benjamin Salisbury's post-Nanny pivot is kinda crazy. After a few minor roles in the early 2000s, he walked away from acting entirely. He took a job at Universal Studios Hollywood as a studio tour guide. Starting at the bottom, he climbed the corporate ladder for over a decade, eventually becoming director of operations and then senior director of attractions for the entire theme park. As for Fran Drescher, she was diagnosed with uterine cancer in 2000. She survived, founded the Cancer Schmancer movement, wrote a New York Times best-selling book about her experience, and was eventually appointed a U.S. public diplomacy envoy for women's health issues. In 2021, she was elected president of SAG-AFTRA and later led the 118-day actors' strike that shut down Hollywood and won concessions on AI protections that reshaped the industry. And about her marriage, in 1999, she divorced Jacobson, who came out as gay shortly after. They remained best friends and creative partners, eventually co-creating the TV Land sitcom Happily Divorced, directly based on their real relationship. And while that's an interesting turn of events, it's not surprising that Fran got through it. She's weathered a lot of storms, all the way back to that horrible incident in 1985, then having the cojones to stand up to CBS when they wanted to make Fran Italian American, and again to save Lauren Lane's job. Time and time again, when the easy path was to fold, she dug in and she was proven right. And that's why, in the end, The Nanny left a legacy that few sitcoms ever do. If you enjoyed this deep dive, give the video a like and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.